Hi there, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds until everyone has a chance to join. For those of you just logging on, we're just going to give it another 20 seconds before we get started. Okay, I think we're ready to get started now. Okay, well, welcome everyone, and I'm happy to have you here for the final day of AABC's virtual annual meeting webinar series. I'm Sam Schwartz, and I'm Member Engagement and Marketing Manager for AABC. We also want to thank TSI for their support today. I just want to go over a few quick notes before we get started. If you have questions for our speaker, please use the Q&A button and not the chat function. We will feed those questions to the speaker at the conclusion of the presentation. So if you have questions, don't hold on to them. Please submit them as they come up. If you have technical issues, please use the chat function to inform us and I will assist you. Today's presentation is Creating a Healthy Workplace in a COVID World, a Better Path Forward with Jeremy McDonald. Jeremy is the principal of Guth DeConzo Consulting Engineers. McDonald is a professional engineer with more than 25 years of experience in HVAC design, energy services, commissioning, and in the construction management industry. His expertise includes indoor air quality assessments with focus on higher education and healthcare facilities. He is also an adjunct professor for Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. He holds a master's in environmental management and policy and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. So thank you again, everyone, for logging on today. And with that, I'll hand it off to our presenter to take it away. Jeremy?
Okay. Sam, thank you, and thank you to the AABC team, and thank you to our sponsor, TSI. Today, I'm just going to briefly go through what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a little background on Guth DeConzo Consulting Engineers, try to explain our perspective and where we're coming from with what we hope is a better path forward with regards to the COVID-19 crisis. We're going to provide an assessment of current conditions, what we see as drivers of change, deliberate and talk about the importance of IAQ comfort conditions in COVID-19 and how we see that may be driving the virus uptick, surge in different areas of the country, world, and hopefully, if we can anticipate, come up with strategies to mitigate the effect. We will talk about some technologies that we can use to harden our IAQ environment, and then we'll sum up with a better path forward. Before we really jump into the presentation, I think it would be helpful to me as a presenter to understand a bit about everyone's background. So Duffy, if we could do a poll question, I think that would be helpful at this juncture. There you go. And we see the poll question, which is, what is your professional role? TABB contractor, a commission agent, engineer, facility manager, architect, general contractor, or other? Okay, and that would be helpful to me, the presenter. Okay, so let's get into it. Guth DeConzo, who we are. First thing, Guth DeConzo Consulting Engineers, like we like to say, with a name like that, you got to be good. Okay, we are a consulting engineering firm with a focus on building systems. We're a traditional MEP firm, fire protection, IAQ. We also do commissioning, retro commissioning, continuous commissioning, construction management. We have a significant amount of experience in the testing and performance of HVAC systems and IAQ. This hands-on experience of doing data logging, system testing, CO2 monitoring, relative humidity monitoring, it gives us a unique experience, which we think informs a varied approach to the whole COVID issue. We've done a lot of IAQ studies for nursing homes, hospitals, and other clients. My particular background, my formative years, which was in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I spent a lot of time in multifamily nursing homes in the boroughs of New York City, doing condition assessments, testing of systems. As we'll talk later, I think deferred maintenance and lack of the basics of indoor air quality may be one of the key reasons why certain market sectors are getting hit harder than others. What we are not, and I come to you as a very humble presenter, the COVID-19 issue, this pandemic, I think we all agree, is a seminal crisis that will affect generations to come, and something that we'll look back on as one of the biggest challenges in our life. I don't pretend to have all the issues. I have a clear focus on indoor air quality. I don't pretend to be a healthcare expert. We're not space planners. We're not time of day scheduling planners. We're not program planning. I think there's a lot of areas of expertise that's required to solve this crisis. I think we as engineers, TABB contractors, commission agents, have a story to tell, and I'm one small piece of that story, which I'm going to tell today. So current conditions, where we are today, October 2020, truthfully, November 2020. The history of pandemics. There will be no return to normalcy until health concerns are addressed. As humans, as parents, that's our primary concern. And until we figure out a way to manage this virus, and I think it's going to be a multi-pronged solution, social distancing, vaccines, whatever, indoor air quality, we're truly not going to return to normal. So we all have a job to do with our area of expertise to try to help that case and move it forward. Economists are increasingly concerned about unintended consequences of people not returning to the workplace. I'm sure there's a lot of folks on this webinar that have experienced issues with getting MERV 13 filters. One small piece of the quote unquote unintended consequences of a huge crisis like this pandemic. The speed of the disruption of COVID isn't really allowing the economy to react in a timely manner. In my view, we've taken 180 years of modern economic progress and flipped it on its head in a very short period. And we're all trying to figure out how do we react, how we retool our society, and how do we move forward in managing this crisis. In my view, today, decisions have mostly been made on understanding of human biology, not physics of airflow and relative humidity. Most of our experts, and they are experts, they speak from a biology background. Our engineering and TABB community and commission community, we think more in terms of physics. And I think that's an important voice. And I think, quite frankly, we have something to offer to get some increased diversity in how we approach this pandemic, since I truly don't believe it's just about biological problem, but we need to think about the physics of how our buildings are operated. And just to emphasize that point of why physics is important, the vast majority of cases, documented cases, are indoors. There's been studies that have come out of China, which I believe less than 0.3% of cases of super spreaders were from outdoors. I think there's an increase in awareness that being outdoors is just a safer environment than being indoors, which emphasizes the need to harden our indoor air quality and really understand how buildings work, and more importantly, how do humans interact with said building, and what do we do as weather conditions change? Okay. Hierarchy of controls. Okay, this is classic risk management. When we're faced with a crisis, we tend to start at the bottom, red alert. That would be our PPE, right? Social distancing, wearing mask. This is the point where, the building's burning down and we need to get everyone to safety. You're not thinking about designing a sprinkler system when you're in crisis. I still think we're in this phase. That's just my personal opinion and my observation. We have done administrative controls, right? I would say March through even today, and it sounds like we're coming to a second wave with the current uptick in numbers, where we work from home, remote learning, and online shopping. If we look to the top, total elimination, right, which is what we all want, that would be eliminate the virus. That would be something to the effect of herd immunity or a very effective vaccine. I think we're a bit of ways away from that. So the focus of this presentation is right smack in the middle, the yellow tab there, which is engineering controls. How do we try to isolate folks from the hazard? How do we try to continue on with as much of a normal life as we can expect while maintaining safety for all of us? So that's kind of where we are, engineering controls. Okay. Drivers of change. There is increasingly a recognition that IAQ helps mitigate virus spread and improves confidence of shareholders of a healthy work environment. I started researching this topic heavily back in May. Personally, I, like a lot of folks, probably was a little bit shell-shocked when this virus started hitting in March. Between making sure I could run my business and just try to reorient my family, it took me a little while to sit back and think, hey, what's the role of indoor air quality? I'm happy to report that the amount of research on indoor air quality today versus what we saw in what I'll call the early days, April and May, it's tenfold to pull a number out of the air. And increasingly in the newspapers and in the journals, both technical and popular, we're seeing more and more discussion of indoor air quality. And that warms my heart. I do think it's going to take a lot of education, a lot of research and time for folks to truly understand indoor air quality, but I do think it's an important part of the solution. With regards to indoor air quality, three main fundamental factors, and without a doubt, there's several other factors that we could put here. But this is going to be the focus of our talk today with regards to IAQ, the role of humidity control, the role of air exchange rates, and the role of human behavior. And then we're going to talk later on about the importance of IAQ technologies. I know a lot of folks on this webinar know a lot about these technologies, but we'll have a discussion of filtration systems, what I consider to active systems, and also, most importantly, the role of fundamental basic operation of HVAC equipment. I don't need to tell this audience how important having tightened belts, linkages that are working properly, BMS systems that are working properly. I don't need to tell you how important that is, and I don't need to tell you how many systems out there are in a state of disrepair and candidly is probably contributing to the problem. So let's talk about what I consider the perfect recipe for the nasty virus. A caveat, I am located in the Northeast, so I try to structure the presentation around what I know best, which is buildings in the Northeast, notably New York City and upstate New York. I will try to point out differences I see in the variables as it relates to different parts of the country as we go through. So here's the recipe if you want to see the nasty virus truly propagate, which in reality, none of us want to see. Poor airflow, high occupant density, and low relative humidity. Let's go through variable by variable and discuss in a little more detail how they fit together. Okay, first, the role of humidity control. Our HVAC engineers and our ASHRAE members who are on the call know this chart well. This simple chart has been in ASHRAE handbooks for over 40 years. Quick digression, I come from a healthcare family. I was raised in an independent pharmacy that's been around since 1927, 4 generations now. My mom's a pharmacist, my brother's a pharmacist. My brother Jim, he's a doctor. He is actually the head of infection control, or I should say high up for infection control in Rhode Island. Don't take it for granted that non-engineers and non-practitioners of HVAC and indoor air quality know anything about this chart. In fact, I've probably presented this chart to 300 people, and very few have said, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Most have said, I had no clue about this chart. So what's this chart mean? Well, it's not quantitative, it's qualitative. And what it demonstrates is for very low relative humidity or very high relative humidity, bacteria, viruses, respiratory irritants, ozone, they're at their worst. And we in the engineering community have known this. That's why our operating rooms are designed with a minimum of 30% relative humidity. We know that when our patient is on that operating room table with a open incision, we know they're greatest at risk. So that's one of the reasons why we try to maintain an absolute minimum of 30% RH, maximum of 60. And that's why folks in the healthcare profession take those readings so seriously, because we know that JCO and state health departments do look at those readings to make sure that we're in range. Low RH equals low density, which allows particles to stay airbound for a longer period of time. There's been a great debate on aerosols. I don't think it's really worth debating. I think they're out there. And I think low relative humidity aggravates that situation. Low relative humidity also compromises our bronchial passages, right? I'm probably not the only one on the call who, when it gets really dry out in those really dry days of January, I get that little hitch of a cough every night. And if I don't run my room humidifier, I have trouble sleeping and I'm just constantly coughing. So in addition to allowing for a friendly environment for the virus, it also compromises our immune systems. So it's kind of a double whammy. I am glad to see recent media coverage. Increasingly, the press is starting to talk about the role of humidity control. I hope they continue to talk about it because I think this is a simple step that we in our offices, in our homes, can help to help mitigate the effect of the virus. No doubt, central humidification, if it's not existing in the building, probably near impossible to install after the air handling unit's been built and the ductwork distribution has been built. But I think there's some simple things that we can do for, like I said, our homes, offices, high-risk environments to maybe improve that relative humidity system, maybe harden our personal bronchial systems, and try to improve the IAQ within our work in home environments. One thing about relative humidity is relative. This topic that I bring up here, fun with data loggers, I'm going to bring up a few times throughout this presentation. Like I mentioned, here at Guth DeConzo, we do a lot with data logging. It's part of our legacy and it's part of our culture, which I think is unique to a lot of MEP firms. So what I'm showing you on this slide Right on the bottom, you are seeing a HOBO data logger, and you can see 75.81 degrees and 47% relative humidity. Well, the trend above it, the blue trend is temperature, and the orange is relative humidity. And you can see that in mid-July, I started trending the relative humidity in one of our bedrooms in our home. Why? Well, because I need to understand better how relative humidity reacts to temperature differences in different environments. And quite frankly, I don't know about you, but this pandemic bored the hell out of me. So I need a new hobby. So I've been data logging everything. So where I have the arrows pointed is the exact moment when it was the day of my youngest son high school graduation party, and we're going to have a nice socially distanced event in the backyard. And I thought, gee, what could be greater fun than to educate my friends on how relative humidity works. So I bought the data logger outside, and you can see that there was a spike where I'm pointing to on the blue trend. It's showing 105 degrees. Trust me, upstate New York never gets to 105 degrees. It was probably more like 90, but I left it in the sun. And you can see that the relative humidity dropped automatically. The absolute humidity in the air didn't change. It's the relative humidity. And I like to emphasize that point because this is a common point of confusion amongst practitioners. And I think it's important to understand, how do we create the conditions so the nasty virus isn't happy and try to disable its ability to propagate. And the reason why is warm air can quote unquote hold more moisture. Okay. Here's a friendly psychrometric chart. Okay. A fact of physics: as the temperature increases, relative humidity decreases. Why is this important to the whole thought of indoor air quality? Well, if we start with the proposition that low relative humidity is very friendly to the nasty virus, and if we know that as we warm our homes, offices, hospitals, nursing homes, multifamily facilities, et cetera, then we know that if we just simply warm up that air, our relative humidity will automatically drop. This is part of the course I teach at RPI. We've done this as an experiment, just changing the thermostat, and this is a very predictable reality, and it coincides well with the results of this psychrometric chart that I'm showing you. So to explain the chart, the light arrow that points all the way to the left, that's an imaginary condition where we're heating air from, say, 30 degrees, 60% RH. Let's imagine that we have a cold house. You come back from a long weekend and you want to warm up the house, and those are your conditions. 30 degrees, 60% RH. Obviously that wouldn't happen, but just for an example. When we heat that air up to 75 degrees, which is my thermostat set point, we move to the right on the psychrometric chart, and you can see that our relative humidity is dropping from 60 to approximately 15% RH. That's what happens when we heat up air in any of our buildings, unless we have an active humidification system to offset that drop in relative humidity. That is one of the reasons why here in the Northeast, low relative humidity is such an important thing to understand to ensure that we have good IAQ for our buildings. The next trend is something that I grabbed from a project that we were commissioning last winter. This trend is showing you data from January 14th to January 25th. And the orange trend is the outdoor air temp, and the yellow and green is the relative humidity. And you can see that the yellow and the green, the relative humidity axis is all the way to the right. They pretty much baselined around 15% RH. Now, of course, they didn't stay at 15% RH. That was how low the data logger went. But you can see for that extended period, That was the readings for these 2 classrooms. That's kind of typical, okay? If you're constantly in the heating mode, and you constantly are heating up that air, yeah, you're going to have very low relative humidity. So back to that qualitative chart that ASHRAE has provided us, if ASHRAE is saying that optimal relative humidity range is 40 to 60%, and we constantly find ourselves in an environment where we're below 15% RH, well, we can see how we're kind of inviting the nasty virus to propagate, which is absolutely what we don't want to do. Okay, I'm going to move on to the role of air exchange rates. There is an increased understanding of the role of dilution, both total air and outdoor air. One of the little thought experiments I did this summer to get me through the virus, and quite frankly, to try to be more of an optimist and think through how we can help society, is I did some thought experiments on if I could draw an imaginary cube around my my head, how many air changes per hour could we get? And I started thinking through that, in a typical commercial office building, we're designing for 1 air change per hour, perhaps 2 air change per hour of dilution air. And I did the experiment a number of breezes, and roughly for a 3 to 5 mile per hour breeze, which is kind of typical for upstate New York, we benefit if we're outside. And again, this is, no walls around, no obstructions, but a typical 3 to 5 mile per hour breeze outdoors with no obstructions, we benefit from roughly 10,000 air changes per hour, as compared to what we have inside of our buildings, which is typically 1 to 2. I don't think there should be any confusion within the public or decision makers on why it's so important, or why most cases are indoors. Comparing 1 or 2 air changes per hour versus multiple thousands of air changes per hour, certainly there's more dilution outdoors. And certainly we need to understand what our outdoor environment is. I get a little nervous when I hear people say, well, just go outdoors, you'll be fine. Well, that's not necessarily true if you're in a courtyard with walls all around you and no opportunity for a nice breeze. You really need to think about both your indoor and your outdoor environment. But suffice to say, I do believe, and I think the data is showing, it's certainly safer to be outdoors. Question, are we sure buildings are receiving the code required amount of outdoor air? Again, I try to be a very practical person. I try to learn from past experiences. I don't think I'm going off on a ledge here when I say that I've observed too many buildings with significant deferred maintenance, belts sometimes not even connected, belts not tight enough, linkages shut, outdoor air dampers, linkages not connected, outdoor air dampers shut. I mention that because as the dialogue continues with both theoretical folks and practitioners, several of the studies I'm looking at seems to just assume that we're getting the requisite amount of total air and dilution air. I don't agree with that assumption. I think we need to look at buildings on an individual basis. And I truly believe if we did start looking at deferred maintenance for individual buildings, we may find a correlation between COVID spikes and the condition of the HVAC equipment. Does fresh air matter? I say yes. This is a CO2 trend of my office. It started in July 20th and it went near the end of August. And what you can see, by the way, I'm JPM. What you can see in the trend is daily spikes. I don't have a good time scale on the bottom, but trust me when I tell you every day between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, we were experiencing peaks of CO2, typically 1,300 ppm up to 1,700 ppm on one day, And then you can see around July 26 or so, the CO2 concentration dropped and we got to a steady state of about 400 parts per million, which is what we would expect since that's pretty close to the steady state of outdoors. So looking at the trend data from early on, which is July 20th to the 25th, I knew I wasn't getting outdoor air into my office. So being one that is, I would say, reasonably knowledgeable about indoor air quality, but more importantly, very concerned about making sure I'm providing a good indoor air quality for my employees this coming winter. I had several discussions with the building manager. And through those discussions, we're able to kind of realize there was a problem, and they found that the outdoor air damper for my office was completely shut. I have a text box when the outdoor air damper was open. That's pointing to August 6th or so. I was actually on vacation and I came back and everyone said, I don't know what you did, but our migraines or I'm not experiencing as many headaches. My allergies aren't as bad and I generally feel better. Well, what we as engineers do, it works, right? If we provide dilution air, it makes for a better indoor air quality environment. And this trend right here is just one simple demonstration that I have felt in the real world of why it's important to provide dilution air. We want to keep those CO2 concentrations down, and we want to make sure that, God forbid, the nasty virus occurs in my office, that I'm given an avenue for that nasty virus to escape to try to minimize the impact on our employees. So, thinking about dilution air, what would you rather drink from? The top or the bottom? A very staid little pond there, no water flow. If there's anything nasty in that pond, it's just building, building, building. Or that right crisp Coors Light commercial of a running stream of water down there on the right-hand side. I think we all can agree we would prefer that Coors Light commercial of a running stream of water there. It's no different for our air, right? The guy at the left, he's talking. Imagine a room with no ventilation. It's just gonna build. Whereas that very happy woman on the lower right-hand corner, she's in total bliss, just experiencing all the air exchanges on this good green earth. So it's the same thing, right? The problem with trying to think about the air is we can't see air like we can see water. We can see air when it's smoggy and polluted, but COVID virus has, to my knowledge, has no color and we can't see it, so we really don't know. That's why we in the technical community have to do a better job of monitoring indoor air quality so we can help people truly understand when they're in a rough situation so that we can make adjustments such as opening that outdoor air damper to make sure we're getting proper dilution air. All righty. Duffy, this is, we're gonna try this, okay? I struggle a lot with how to see air and how to make this problem come to life. So in the picture on the right, you are looking at the slipper of my neighbor, Kenner the DJ. And one night I texted him and said, could you come on over and bring your smoke machine? He's a DJ, so he has a smoke machine. On the picture on the left, you have a Medify HEPA filter with bipolar ionization. There's a bunch of good products for the residential market, and candidly, I am using a similar technology to the Medify for my own office. So what we're about to do is we're gonna run this quick video, and to demonstrate, does this HEPA filter capture or not, we're running this smoke machine, and we're gonna see how it's gonna do it with my friend Kenner the DJ. So Duffy, here we go.
Okay, we're going to start our second challenge. Let her rip there, Kenner. pretty much. There's nothing coming out the other side. You want to see? That's pretty cool. It's probably killing the filter right now, but that's okay.
All right. So again, this is not a perfect demonstration of how HEPA filters work, but us in the business, we know HEPA filters have been around a long time. We know they have a good track record. This is a visual cue that I provided for my employees and my family and friends to try to show how does this all work. Also, it's another cue that we need to get more voices in finding this solution. Kenner's just a DJ. No, I shouldn't say just a DJ. Kenner's a fantastic DJ. Without his smoke machine, I can't run this simple experiment. Without folks like you on the phone or on the conference getting part of the conversation and bringing your technical knowledge to the fore, I think our biology friends are missing out on our voices. It takes a whole team to solve problems.
Okay.
Oops, sorry about that. So I think testing is important, perhaps a market opportunity for TABB. The picture on the left, again, is a Minify HEPA filter with bipolar ionization. And on top of that, it's a particle counter that we bought here at Guth DeConzo. I've invested approximately $15,000 in particle counters, ionization counters, on top of our CO2 relative humidity loggers and all the other test equipment we have, because quite frankly, this is a really heady topic and I do not want to be recommending technologies that I'm not sure will work. So the chart on your right is a test of a different HEPA filter that we tested, not the Medify. This other unit has a ability to adjust fan speed. And if you look at the 0.3 nanometer particles, which is all the way to the left, we're showing the particle count for baseline. This was for a classroom, 225,000 particles, and then the various speeds. We ran at 33%. We see a 16% reduction, 66%, 49% reduction, and finally we cranked it to 100%, and we found a 72% reduction in particle counts. A couple of quick points on this, and we're going to talk later on about different technologies. If you're looking at applying these portable HEPA filters for your home or your clients or whatever, think about noise. Noise is significant. I do have one running right now in the background right here at low speed, which is 33%. But you do need to think about the noise. You can see that if you run it at higher speeds, you're going to get better performance. I would much prefer to have a 72% particle reduction versus 33% speed, which was 16%. Okay. The last of the three topics, we talked about relative humidity. We talked about air exchange. This is the most important topic, you and me. I'm a big believer in human behavior. People will tend to congregate, forced and unforced. That's not a criticism, that's reality. Jeremy, every winter says, I'm gonna embrace the cold. I'm gonna go out for my walks at night. I'm gonna do more skiing. I am sad to report to you, I'm a failure. I tend to congregate indoors. That's where most of my winter hobbies are. So I make this statement with no criticism of anyone. That's who we are. We also have to realize it's very hard for some people to socially distance. Nursing homes, multifamily, prisons, and high density areas. We wrote this initial article in June. In New York Times today, there was an article where they're finally figuring out that folks in high density areas, such as multifamily in the boroughs, they have a difficult time socially distancing. By their nature, you know, when you're living in a building where there's 1,300 residents, it's really, really difficult to socially distance. And I think I'm getting out of my lane a little bit, But we have to be very practical when we tell people to go home and shelter in place when you have 1,300 people in your building. And oh, by the way, the HVAC systems may be substandard. We have to be human and practical on how we evaluate the crisis. We also have to realize people tend to bend rules, myself included. Studies within New York State, this is back in May, they indicated that COVID-19 cases don't always show up where expected, i.e. home. There was a big study back in May, and what they found out is surprisingly, the vast majority of cases at the time were not essential workers, but were people at home. Again, this isn't a big surprise to me, knowing that home has many different definitions. Like I said, if you're in a large building, be it a nursing home, a multifamily, a prison, and for whatever reason you can't socially isolate, yeah, you're at risk for the virus. And probably the best advice is not to shelter in place, because that place is very, very small for you. So again, I think we just have to recognize this. We have a voice based on what we see on buildings, and we need to enunciate this a little better to our biology colleagues so they can understand a little bit better where we're coming from. This is a quick topic, super spreaders. Is it really indoor air quality? This is something I wrestle with. And about a month ago, a study did come out that indicated it may not be who you're with, i.e. that super spreader person who's just got a huge quote unquote viral load, but it may be where you are. If you're in a small place where there's a lot of singing and people have a very high density, the where you are may be more important than who you are with. And again, I think that's a simple thought, but I think we just have to tie these pieces together so we can come up with a better path forward on how we tackle this virus. So I'm going to pivot a bit into some research that we did here at Guth DeConzo. With our experience of doing data analysis and trend analysis over the years, we started to think back in May, what are the desirable conditions for the virus spread? And we went through them already. High density environment, low relative humidity, poor air exchange. And we started to think, is it possible that the virus is moving with weather patterns? And this was our fundamental question. Are comfort conditions and how humans react to comfort conditions a major driver of virus propagation? And again, I'm going to speak to the Northeast. When it gets cold, which is typically right now, although we have an unseasonal warm spell up here in beautiful upstate New York and New York City, when it gets cold this time of year, we as humans do a few things. We tend to go inside, right? Which means we're going to congregate more. We tend to turn on the heat, which means that we're going to drop our relative humidity. And we also tend to shutter our windows, outdoor air dampers, etc., which means that our dilution air is going to drop. So to kind of take a look at this and see if this IAQ variable is part of the overall COVID-19 trend and surges, we trended outdoor air conditions versus the virus propagation, i.e. daily case count, for approximately 15 major cities throughout the United States and about 4 international cities. We chose states in the North and we chose states in the South. We chose New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and South Dakota. And to be candid, the reason why we chose South Dakota is because we're looking for an outlier with regards to social distancing practices. Where I am in New York State and in the Northeast in general, we were pretty aggressive early on with putting quarantines in place, putting masking policies in place, and social distancing. So we kind of wanted to test our thoughts versus a couple of different management strategies, if you will. And what we saw, and I'm going to show you data in a moment, is the virus caseload for all those areas declined dramatically in late April. For the southern states, and we picked Florida, Arizona, Texas, and South California, in a few other areas, we saw the exact opposite, which again, I'll show you the data in a moment. And our thought is what happened in the Northeast the exact opposite happened in the South. When the warm, humid weather came, the high, heating days, people down south tend to go inside. And if you find yourself in a high density area, such as multifamily, a nursing home, a restaurant, bar, and people are congregating and you don't have good ventilation, and you have a untenable relative humidity situation, yeah, that's a case where the COVID count is most likely going to go up. Then lastly, we asked, well, what about San Francisco? Why did San Fran never experience the virus propagation that New York City did? And New York Times came out with a piece in, I want to say it was early May, and they showed a simulation of how they think that there was like 30,000 virus cases that they believe were already here in the United States in, I believe it was early February. And what jumped out to me is, if the Times is right, and candidly they always aren't, but if their analysis is correct, there was about 9,000 cases in San Francisco in early February, and about 10,000 cases in New York City and the boroughs in early February. Well, New York City experienced an incredible amount of devastation, death, and loss, whereas San Fran didn't. And we're going to show you some trending again, but one of my thoughts is, okay, here in New York, what we do in March, when that virus, February, March, and April, when the virus did the most damage, we go inside, we turn on our heat, we drop the relative humidity, and we shut our windows in or outdoor air dampers. Whereas San Francisco, much more temperate climate, very moderate. They don't tend to go in and shelter like we do, and they don't tend to turn on their heating systems and shut down their ventilation. So it's my personal opinion, but I think that's the major difference between our two biggest global cities in the United States. So here's some data. The blue trend is the minimum daily temperature. We wrestled with a lot of variables to trend against, and this is the best that we could come up with. The daily case count, thankfully, a lot of the state health departments have fantastic data sets. So that's why we're able to look at so many cities. And you can see in New York City that as the temperatures rose, the case counts came down. We're always updating our trends. We are seeing an uptick in the Northeast, there's no doubt about it. But currently, at least for New York City and a few other areas we're tracking, we are not seeing a huge uptick. Candidly, I would expect, if nothing changes, that we will see more cases as the winter months progress. Hopefully I'm wrong, and time will tell. Let me just flip back for a moment, okay? Just for comparison, New York City and San Francisco, all the way to the left, you can see that we're wrestling with 6,000 cases a day. Anyone in the New York area or the Northeast knows how horrific this was. Terrible, terrible loss of human life in just too many folks getting sick. It was terrible. 6,000 people a day, okay? San Fran, admittedly, the population is not as big, but you can see the case count. They were topping out at about 100, well, in the early part, 60, 70 cases a day. Again, both of the areas start from the same point. New York City experienced 6,000 cases a day, San Francisco, 60. I'm sure there's other reasons, but this does kind of argue that indoor air quality is kind of important. Now I'm going to go through these charts quickly. You'll have them to take a look at, and please challenge me if you think I'm wrong. Los Angeles, as the weather increased, the case count increased. Again, we think it's because people are simply going indoors, high density environments. If you have high density, poor dilution of air, and high relative humidity or low relative humidity, yeah, that virus is going to do a lot of damage. This is Arizona. Arizona was in the press a lot over the summer. So I find this interesting. You can see they're starting to experience more of an uptick. I haven't looked at the data lately to see exactly where that's happening. But again, they came down significantly. July 3rd, they peaked out at 3,500 cases a day. And still, one case is too many, but the cases have dropped precipitously. Again, as the weather conditions changed, the cases have dropped to approximately 500 per day. So again, in my view, and I think we all share this, one case is too many. But again, this is data like this tells us we got to take a look at weather and how we react to it to better understand how this virus will spike. Oops, sorry about that. Here we go. And this is St. Louis. Guth DeConzo is a little slow to the gun on seeing how the Midwest is reacting. So in my view, this is inconclusive. But again, there does seem to be indication that as the temperatures are dropping down, the cases are dropping down. Lot to study in the Midwest as we're seeing a spike through the majority of the upper Midwest right now. Okay. Where are we going? Like yourself, if I knew where we were going, I'd be a millionaire. But this is a photo that I looked often. New York Times does a good job of showing the case counts across the United States. This is an intensity graph. And you can see that for the vast majority of the western part of the country, yes, there's definitely spikes. And the virus is still doing too much damage. But boy, oh boy, when I look at that upper Midwest, that's a real cause for concern. Our team is going to be taking a greater look at that. We're trying to get some more data looking backwards and try to better understand, why the virus is doing so much damage right now in the upper Midwest and how indoor quality may or may not have an impact. So time will tell, and hopefully for the benefit of everyone on this call and our friends and family, we see the intensity of this whole map go down over the next couple of months. Time will tell. Okay, so I'm going to pivot again to IAQ technologies. We're going to start with the role of filtration. ASHRAE is recommending a minimum of MERV 13 or highest level achievable. I know that some new recommendations that have come out recently for healthcare have not completely digested. But let's just talk about filters in general. We need to weigh the energy impact and impact on airflow, right? I know in New York State early on in July, there was a push by the governor to put HEPA filters in for malls. I think most folks in the industry knew that that's pretty much impossible. So we have to weigh A, how much physical space do we have, and B, how much oomph do we have on that fan? Higher the MERV rating, the better. I need to clarify that caveat. You got to think about your hazard. For example, probably doesn't do a lot of benefit to put a high MERV filter on an air handling unit that's 100% outdoor air. We need to think about, what's the hazard and what's the application. The most important point, very important that filters are installed tightly in dry environments and per manufacturer specifications. I have a few pictures of pain here, which was for a job that we commissioned, and we were doing our 6-month checkup. In the lower right-hand corner on the picture to the left, you can see that filter is trapped in the heat wheel. So to me, and this is something we talk to our clients a lot, and we really try to emphasize, whatever you decide to do, whatever you decide to invest your very important money in, let's make sure we do it right. I'd rather have a MERV 8 filter that was installed correctly and properly maintained than a HEPA filter that is not installed correctly and not properly maintained. Some other systems, UV light is very effective in killing viruses, bacteria, and mold. Our friends in the healthcare industry, I'm probably not unique. We've been commissioning and designing and installing a bunch of these systems. just for coil maintenance purposes, over the last 10 years, there is a very good track record of the technology. It's something that I feel pretty comfortable with because we've done a bunch of these projects. It is reasonably priced. For about a 20,000 CFM unit, figure about $1,000 in material costs. And then the labor is going to be a function of your local labor rates and also project complexity. And that gives some engineering targets here, just some rules of thumb when you design and implement these systems. Air ionization, this has been I would say, a somewhat controversial topic. I know ASHRAE has not fully embraced this technology. And candidly, I'm not sure if I'm there yet either. Guth DeConzo has tested a few air ionization installs with some commercial products. And if you believe that if you can drop your particle count in your space, and if you can neutralize particles, then you can reduce your chances of spreading the nasty virus, then it does, the data that we're coming up with indicates that, yeah, there may be something here, but I'm personally not there yet. There are some quote unquote zero ozone technologies that just entered the market. That's always been a big concern for ASHRAE. Ozone generators has been used for many years in focus applications, sterilization, laundries, pool disinfectant, etc. Ozone will kill anything, but you really need to think through the safety concerns and make sure you have a highly educated client. Some of our clients are using portable units, not really my area of expertise, but they've kind of figured out the health and safety aspect of it, and they're very happy with it. Okay, this is a trend of ion count versus particle count. The blue trend is a 0.3 nanometer particle count. It's our view here at Guth DeConzo that the smaller the particle count, that's more indicative of the virus, because we know it's a very, very tiny particle, 0.12 nanometers. So 0.3 is typically the data set that we look at. And by the way, you know, as far as commercially available particle counters, I do believe 0.3 is the smallest one. But for this particular test, we can see that as the ion count dropped, the particle count increased, and vice versa, which tends to indicate that, yes, the bipolar ionization, which is basically, you know, creating charged ions, is neutralizing particles. So this is one of the reasons why we think this technology has merit. By the way, bipolar is, in my view, extremely affordable, especially when you compare it to UVI lighting, which we're going to talk about in a sec. So definitely a technology to consider for your facility and something to keep an eye on. Okay, real quick, as we wrap up, disinfection lighting. There's two types of systems. UVGI, which is upper room, utilizes shortwave UVC photons. Long track record of disinfection. This technology has been around, gosh, I think since the 50s. It was used to help with tuberculosis. There are safety risks which have to be considered. If you're interested in this technology, make sure you check with your authority having jurisdiction. I know here in upstate New York, the education department is very reluctant. Excuse me. They're not allowing you to implement this technology if you're going to use it while the space is active. And in my view, that's the greatest benefit, is when there's occupants in the space. So be very careful in applying it with your local jurisdiction. I do find this technology to be kind of pricey, especially compared to UV coils and bipolar ionization and just good old retrocommission of our air handling units. So, and again, this is just my personal experience. What I find when I do my indoor air quality studies is this technology is more on the more expensive end. We're reserving the application of this technology for our high-risk areas. For example, the nurse's office, principal's office, locker rooms, etc. Near UV, again, proven effective in disinfecting while the room is occupied. It is very safe, so that's a good thing. And it targets hard surfaces, which is another advantage. It's also very expensive. It's been used in operating rooms before the virus, and based on its price point, I don't see it, but I may be wrong, that it's going to get widespread implementation, again, because of the price. And here's some quick pictures for near UV. And let's sum up with a path forward. So what we talk to our clients about, right? Everyone is very concerned about this nasty virus, as we should be. So let's just talk about a path forward. First step, conduct a needs assessment. Get a plan in place before clients and employees ask, right? I would not recommend just going out and buying UV coils, bipolarization. I would start evaluating your facility and come up with a plan. Assess the existing conditions and customer requirements. Assess the concerns of your employees and your clients, and provide an objective analysis of existing conditions and risk. A lot of you are doing this now, which is great to see. A lot of the clients that we're working with already have plans in place before they call us. First things first, let's invest in low cost, no cost measures. Why spend all the money on bipolar ionization or UV if the belts aren't tightened up and working properly on the air handling unit? I advocate with a lot of our clients to reach out to a certified TABB contractor and just make sure that, give your building a checkup and make sure that the basics are working properly. To me, it's the biggest bang for the buck, and quite frankly, it may be the most effective. Take a look at your filtration systems. Try to improve your humidity control. This is very, very difficult. We are, with our clients, it's not reasonable to try to put in a centralized humidification system in a short time period and or with a small budget. Let's look at your high risk areas and maybe think about local humidification. Okay, let's move down. Capital intensive measures. Conduct an analysis to determine what is the best mix of capital investments for all the different options which we just mentioned. And again, look at that energy impact. Quick point, both the UV air side and the bipolar, very, very small energy impact is what we're finding. So when you're doing that analysis, take a look at the maintenance, take a look at the energy, take a look at the capital, and take a look at the expected IAQ benefit. Above all else, our community, we have a lot of knowledge collectively, and we have a lot to offer. We have to do a couple things. We have to embrace change. We have increasing evidence that the market is recognizing the importance of IAQ. That's good for society, and that's good for everyone on this presentation. We have to have a positive attitude. I don't like being a victim. I am not the aggrieved. I am adamant that our industry can provide solutions and we can help people be safe and stay in their buildings. Apply sound and timeless engineering principles and application principles to make our buildings safer. We really should feel good about our roles in society and our job. We really can help people. And I ask everyone, be a change agent. My family, my friends, my employees, next time I mention IAQ, they're probably going to throw up. But I think we have to speak out. We need to explain it to our fellow man, the importance of indoor air quality and why a solid indoor air quality environment is a better path forward and part of the solution to the COVID crisis. With that, I want to say thank you. I leave a couple references to some studies that I've seen that I think are just fantastic. And again, thank you very much. And I'd like to now open it up for questions and discussion.
Okay, thanks so much, Jeremy. We have about 10 questions to run through. Jeremy, did you have time to run over a bit today?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So let's jump in here. The first one is, does COVID eliminate the need for demand control ventilation sequencing as it relates to PPM for the foreseeable future?
Myself and a lot of clients think that the best path forward for the foreseeable future is to increase your minimum outdoor air exchange. There has been some guidance out there saying to override demand control ventilation. I look at it a little bit differently. I think that the infrastructure in place, namely the CO2 sensors that we use for demand control ventilation, that is a fantastic proxy to leverage that, pivot a bit, and take advantage of those sensors to take a look at your CO2 level. A lot of clients are saying, hey, if I was at 1,000 ppm, that was my set point for my CO2, my demand control ventilation. Well, let's look at 600 ppm to make sure we're getting more dilution there. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thanks. Hopefully that answered their question. Let's go on to the next one. What type of particles are in the air that the MEDIF air filtration system was taking out of the air when increasing the CFM?
That was mostly water vapor, from the smoke generator. And I would have to get back to you with the actual reagent or agent that was in there. But that's how it works. It combines smoke and some reagent, and it creates that puffy look. And can I just add a very good question? Because I was actually thinking this morning, if someone asked that question, would I know what the agent is? So I'll try to provide that as a follow-up.
Perfect. So the next question is, given your cold Northeast winter conditions, do you promote running OA flows at code minimum with MERV 13 filtration to maintain maximum indoor RH, given that the vast majority of HVAC systems in commercial buildings are in the Northeast, given the vast majority of HVAC systems in commercial buildings in the Northeast are not equipped with humidifiers?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a real trade-off, right? Because as we're bringing in more outdoor air, our relative humidity is going to drop. And it is a real trade-off and something we wrestle with our clients. To answer your question, yes, the filters are important. We don't recommend just running 100% outdoor all winter. A, your heating coils aren't going to be sized for that. B, you do have the trade-off with the relative humidity. And again, I'm going to give the engineer an answer. It depends. I will tell you, if a building is properly ventilated and you don't have active humidification within the building, chances are you're going to be very low relative humidity, regardless if you're at your minimum outdoor air setting or if you crank it up, to say 50, 75%. So, I try to be a very honest person. It's something I'm wrestling with. We have not advocated to say all systems go, crank it up to 100%, but it is something that we're wrestling with on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, moving along here. Someone is asking, in terms of commissioning purposes, do you trust more on BMS outputs or your measurement devices? They understood measurement devices need to own frequent calibration, but more available in all corners. If you use the measurement devices, please advise which equipment you're using during your IAQ assessment. Apologies, a couple typos.
Okay. Again, if the BMS system is properly commissioned and we're confident in the results, well, yeah, we'll definitely use them. Same goes for our testing equipment. We do check our calibration on our temperature relative humidity sensors and our CO2 monitors. We're a little bit new to air particle testing, so I haven't calibrated it yet, although I understand we're good for a time period or a long time period. So it's got to be calibrated. It's got to be accurate. We're pretty good at looking at a DMS system and seeing if the results don't make sense. And we're also pretty good at looking at our data loggers and see if they don't make sense. I use Telair CO2 monitors, Hobo, temp RH sensors. And forgive me, I forget the particle counter that we just bought 2 of them. They were quite pricey. Now it's a new one, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay, next one. TABB firms are generally making adjustments such that system performance matches design criteria. Given that relatively narrow focus, how can we best contribute to the solution without crossing over into design decisions or equipment recommendations?
I think it's back to that building checkup. The TABB professional is the key. You know, I'm a pretty hands-on engineer, but I'm not a TABB contractor. And there's a bunch of good ones out there. I highly recommend to all clients, first do a system checkup, right? Let's look for the obvious. If your belts are not connected or your outdoor temper linkage isn't attached, well, it doesn't really make sense to bring a TABB contractor in. However, if for most facilities, you're going to find that some systems need additional study, and that's where you want to bring the TABB contractor in, just to make sure that your systems are acting as the design indicates they should.
Okay, the next question is for UV systems, and I'm going to answer this one live so you can read it yourself. It's a bit technical. At 1,500 2 per centimeter squared, what reduction of COVID would you expect? So I'm gonna post that one. Are you able to see that in the chat?
No.
Hmm.
Without seeing it, I can tell you that it's going to depend on a number of variables, namely the airflow, the relative humidity, and the capture time. One of my frustrations with the whole UV is trying to determine that percent reduction. And the vendors that I'm working with, I'm not sure if they really know yet. It is typically pretty impressive. We asked for a submittal, and I've seen, and again, it's going to be a function of the various variables I mentioned: your airflow, your relative humidity, your capture time, and also the intensity. 90% is very doable.
Okay, I have a few more questions here. The next one is CO2 only measures if people are breathing in the space, but does not account for impact of filters, UVC, and other air cleaners. And 1 out of 20 people asymptomatic and 5 out of 20 will result in the same CO2 in the space. Are you sure you want to use DCV and CO2 for indicating a space on its own?
I don't think we do. I think we kind of answered that, and I can't see the question, but more dilution air, the better. But again, it's going to be relative to how many occupants you have, and you definitely have to look at the other variables.
So we have one more question lined up. So one solution for the winter can be, while heating your home, is to use a humidifier to bring the RH higher?
That is correct. And, again, the classic engineer answer, it depends. I'm not an advocate of just going out and blindly humidifying. My personal home, we have low occupant density. It's my wife and I and 2 teenage boys in a 3,500 square foot house. We decided we're just going to humidify our bedrooms and have a nice portable humidifier when we have friends and family over to raise that relative humidity if we're gathering in the kitchen or the dining room, etc. So I really think for all these solutions, you really have to take a look at your individual circumstance and think through and analyze what's the best for you. But if you're asking me, do I think it's a good idea to have humidifiers in the home? certainly from the personal health aspect, yeah, I do think it's a good idea. Because as we mentioned, it can help your bronchial passages and help your individual HVAC system against the nasty virus.
Okay, that's all the questions we have. Thanks so much, Jeremy, and spending time with us today.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate the questions. And if you have any feedback or other questions, just please drop me a note. And thank you.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone once again, our members and non-members who are on the line with us. If you're interested in getting involved in AABC, we have an AABC Industry Partner Program that has several categories based on whether you're an individual or a company, and that way you can decide what's best for you. And we hope to see everyone soon. So stay safe and healthy, everyone.